Hello and welcome to the Money Talk Show. I'm your host, Griffin Stotland. This is the show all about the economics of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We are live from Doha, Qatar. Today, I'd like to talk about the economics of Canada. We're going to be looking at the inflation rate, unemployment, the equity in their income distribution, and their economic growth and what direction the economy is going in. Today we'll start by looking at the unemployment rate in Canada. The unemployment rate is at 5.9%, and year over year it dropped 0.4%. Last year it was at 6.3%. The U.S. Federal Reserve estimates that a healthy, natural unemployment rate should be somewhere from 4 to 5%. So from Canada moving from 6.3 to 5.9, it's moving in the right direction. One of the possible causes of this drop in unemployment may be the new Toyota plant opening in Ontario. Just last month, the Japanese auto giant announced that it would be investing nearly $1.5 billion into producing new cars in Canada. And this is huge news for the Canadian economy, because this plant will add nearly 8,000 new jobs. And with jobs comes new disposable incomes for Canadians, and with disposable incomes comes a shift in aggregate demand. And this can expand the economy. Speaking of expanding the Canadian economy, we will now look at growth of the Canadian economy. In 2013, Canada's GDP reached a record high at 1.84 trillion US dollars. But every year since, the GDP has dropped. The reason this happens, I believe, is because of the new classical theory of a self-correcting economy. When the GDP was at its highest in 2013, it was only because of an expansionary gap caused by growth in aggregate supply. But since then, the long-run aggregate supply in Canada has slid to the right to match and create a new market equilibrium. What caused the increase in short-run aggregate supply? Well, it may have been the effect of the fracking boom in 2011 and the subsequent growth of the oil and gas industry out west in Alberta. Now, according to a stat in 2016, just over 8% of Canada's GDP comes from oil and gas. So when fracking came along, which is actually a topic I covered in my previous podcast, the short-run aggregate supply of Canada increased due to the vastly larger amounts of oil and gas that were extracted. But I would like to talk about the present state of the Canadian economy, which is experiencing the effects of an LRAS correction, one of which being an increase in real GDP, which we saw during the record highs in 2013, and the other being disinflation or even deflation, which we're currently seeing, and I would like to talk about that more now. You see, in 2014, the Canadian dollar was comparable to the US dollar in value, about 1-to-1. But since then, the Canadian dollar has lost about 20% of its value. Now, why does this matter? Well, this drop in the Canadian dollar's value shows us that the Canadian economy is experiencing disinflation. According to the US Federal Reserve, the safe zone for inflation is between 1 and 2%. And during those record high GDP years of 2013, 2014, the Canadian inflation rate was around 3%. And since then, it has dropped to around 1%. Now that Canada's inflation rate has dropped into the ones, which we've established as a safe zone, it can show us that the LRAS is very close, if not has already moved to become the new market equilibrium. So far on the Money Talks show, we've talked about unemployment, economic growth, and inflation in Canada. This all obviously has to do with economics, and money, and income. But who gets that income? How well is income in Canada distributed? What does the income inequality look like in Canada? To easily look at income inequality, it can all be boiled down to one number, the Gini index, G-I-N-I, which is a scale from 0 to 100 that measures income distribution around the world. 0 being the most equal, 100 being absolute income inequality. On this 0 to 100 scale, Canada scores a 34, which is one of the best in the world. This is due to government policies that help redistribute wealth, such as high taxes on top earners and a universal healthcare system. And to take a deeper look into Canadian healthcare, we have on the phone Canadian doctor Mitchell Stotland. Dr. Stotland, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Dr. Stotland, can you tell us a little bit about your history working in the Canadian healthcare system?
Well, my history of working in the Canadian healthcare system really amounts to my residency training. So I did my medical school training in Canada, which is 4 years, and then my residency was 7 years, of which 5 was clinical, meaning working in the hospitals, and 2 was research. So I guess in terms of working in the healthcare setting, there was 5 years of residency. Yeah, so that's my history of working in the healthcare system in Canada, and that was between 1989 through 1996.
And what part of Canada did you work in?
That was all in Montreal, working in the McGill University system.
So before we get to pricing, can you tell us a little bit about how the Canadian healthcare system works?
The Canadian healthcare system is broken up based on province. So each province runs their own healthcare system. They're similar, but with differences. It is a universal healthcare in that the government pays for free medical care for everybody. That's not, I don't think, 100% coverage for all things, such as, say, eyeglasses, some pharmaceuticals,
Prescription drugs?
Prescription drugs are not covered? Okay, yeah. Some maybe. I'm not sure about, say, dental care is not covered, orthodontic care is not covered. But essentially most healthcare, basic and specialized healthcare is available to all Canadians.
So you say that healthcare is made available to all Canadians. Am I to believe that healthcare in Canada is free?
So, I mean, the concept of it being healthcare for free is not totally true in the sense that it's being paid for by taxes, right? So you pay more tax in a country like Canada or most European countries or any other country that has universal health care. So it's never free. You pay more tax, and then the government manages it. All that tax money, uses that tax money to create a universal payer system.
Interesting. So, Doc, would you say that universal healthcare in Canada helps alleviate income inequality?
I think it does lessen income inequality. Yeah, I mean, I think in the United States, you've got people who live in fear constantly, how they might pay their healthcare bills, should something catastrophic occur. And there are people who are paying such a big chunk of their disposable income to insurance premiums. Insurance premiums can be thousands of dollars a year, and for many people, that's just a huge percentage of their pay.
So, Dr. Stotland, I see here that you also went to a Canadian college. Could you tell us a little bit about the Canadian public education system?
That may be something that also can contribute to better income equality in Canada, in that higher education is free or almost free. And the system in the United States is insane or almost insane, right?
I know what you mean. Well, Dr. Stotland, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here. I listen to your show all the time, and it was really an honor to finally make it here. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, we want to thank Dr. Mitchell Stotland for joining us on the show and giving us that key insight into the Canadian healthcare system. So now we've talked a lot about income inequalities and Canada's GDP in a downturn. But now let's talk about some ways to fix the Canadian economy, at least one aspect of it. And for that, we welcome to the show my fellow countryman, my friend, and alleged socialist, Ibrahim Abulnaga. Ibrahim, welcome to Money Talks.
Glad to be here.
Ibrahim, just back there, I used the S word, socialist. Do you think that's fair to say? Does that align with your economic views?
I think that's all right to be a little bit socialist. In the modern day, Canada already has many socialist policies like socialized healthcare and high taxes compared to some other countries around the world.
Okay, that's fair. So the way that I think that the Canadian economy can be fixed is by Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party actually giving Canadians a tax break, similar to that in the U.S. And we saw in the U.S. After Donald Trump's tax break to the American people in January, the Dow Jones grew by maybe 1,000, 2,000 points. It really was remarkable. And the way that a tax break could help stimulate the Canadian economy to where it was in 2013 or even higher, GDP-wise. So the way that a tax break could work is that it helps allow Canadians to have larger disposable incomes. The government doesn't take so much away. More of the income stays in Canadians' pockets. And disposable income is a direct determinant of AD, so it can shift aggregate demand outward, expanding the Canadian economy. What do you think?
So I feel like what we should do is have the taxes be even harsher for higher income earners and
Really?
redistribute that to lower wealth people because that would really bring down the inequality. Yeah, we should redistribute the money by either direct government provisions or transfer payments like welfare or similar programs to help poor people get what the things they need to succeed in life.
Okay, I see where you're coming from. But earlier in this program, I had Canadian Dr. Mitchell Stotland on to tell us about Canada's universal healthcare system, as well as their cheap to free higher education system as well. Do you think that this could be expanded? Is this not already a world-class welfare system?
I believe so, because right now the highest income earners in Canada they can sometimes earn more than half of the wealth in the country, and that's just unacceptable, honestly, for a first world country.
Ibrahim, I agree with you that such a small percent of the Canadian population having such a unproportionately large amount of the income, it's not okay. But I also think that on a worldly scale, compared to other first world countries, for you to say that it's unacceptable, I think that it's kind of a stretch, considering that their Gini index score is one of the world's best. And while I also understand that it can't all be boiled down to one number, I think that for where it is in the world, Canada is still a world-class country.
That being said, Ibrahim, I think that your plan to increase Canadian income taxes would actually hurt the government because the way I see it, the line on the Laffer curve for Canada is already too far to the right. So if you increase income tax anymore, you'll actually be losing money. So moving the income tax for Canadians down might actually help the government. That being said, if you're saying that income tax should be increased, you have to understand that it's called the 1% for a reason. And I understand that the 1% in Canada has disproportionate amount of wealth, and it's, as I said, it's not okay. But at the same time, they do make up a very small portion of the population, and the rest of Canadian citizens, hardworking Canadians, they're coming home with income, and you're telling them that you want to take such a large portion of their income away. I trust Canadian citizens with money more than the Canadian government in Ottawa. So, of course, it's a new classical versus Keynesian mindset, but that's my take on it.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show. It was a pleasure to have you.
That's all right. Thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for the Money Talk Show. Thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, I'm Griffin Stalin. Thank you.